What happens when a quiet woodworker hears a frantic knock at late night, opens his front door to find his ex-wife standing in the freezing rain holding a single battered suitcase, and hears her whisper, "Can I stay tonight?" 2 years after a painful divorce fueled by high-pressure corporate ambition and bitter silence, her unexpected arrival shatters his quiet, predictable life. Tonight, a long-buried secret about why she really walked away will finally surface, forcing them both to confront deep regrets, broken promises, and the fragile possibility of a second chance. Will he turn her away, or rebuild what broke? Before we immerse ourselves in this moving story of quiet vulnerability, unspoken regret, and the courage it takes to open your heart to a second chance, please take a moment to subscribe to our channel, tap the notification bell, and leave a comment below letting us know where in the world you are tuning in from tonight. Your constant support fuels our mission to bring you grounded, powerful stories about what truly matters in the human heart. Now, let us begin. The autumn wind sweeping down from the Oregon coastal range carried the heavy, unmistakable scent of damp fir needles, cold river stone, and wet cedar wood. Inside my restored craftsman home on the edge of town, the only light came from the soft amber glow of the brick fireplace and the low desk lamp in my adjoining woodworking shop. It was 11 p.m. on a dark Thursday night. Rain lashed against the heavy double-hung glass windows in rhythmic, relentless sheets, rattling the brass latches. I was 34 years old, and my days were built around predictable, quiet routines. I ran a small custom furniture workshop, handcrafting dining tables, bookshelves, and cabinet frames from reclaimed timber. My hands were rough, permanently stained around the fingernails with dark walnut oil and fine pine dust. After 12-hour workdays inhaling sawdust and fitting mortise and tenon joints, I preferred the solitude. My life was simple, safe, and entirely under my control. I had spent 2 years building that control brick by brick after my marriage ended. I was leaning over my workbench, running a piece of fine grit sandpaper along the curved edge of a white oak armrest, when a noise cut through the roar of the wind. It wasn't the creak of the porch floorboards or the scrape of fir branches against the roof gutter. It was 3 sharp, hesitant thuds against the front door. I froze, the block of sandpaper resting mid-stroke. In our quiet neighborhood, no one knocked at 11 o'clock on a stormy night. I wiped my dusty hands on my dark shop apron, unclipped my leather tool holster, and walked quietly down the narrow hallway toward the entryway. I pulled open the heavy oak door, expecting a lost traveler or a neighbor whose power line had gone down in the gale. Instead, the cold rain blew across the threshold, and my heart slammed against my ribs so violently I lost my breath. Standing on the damp wooden porch, drenched from head to toe, was Claire, my ex-wife. She looked entirely disconnected from the sharp, polished corporate executive who had signed our divorce papers 24 months ago in a glass skyscraper in Seattle. Her long dark hair hung in wet, heavy strands around her neck. Her cheeks were pale and translucent under the yellow porch light, and her hazel eyes were wide, shadowed with a bone-deep exhaustion that made her look fragile. She wore an oversized beige trench coat that was soaked at the hem, and in her left hand, she gripped the handle of a single, mud-splattered leather suitcase. We stood there in absolute silence for 5 excruciating seconds, separated by 2 feet of rain-slicked threshold and 2 years of painful distance. The wind howled through the Douglas firs, but neither of us moved. Claire swallowed hard, her lower lip trembling faintly from the cold. Her voice, when it finally broke through the roar of the storm, was barely louder than a whisper. "Ethan," she breathed, her hazel eyes locking onto mine with an intensity that stripped away 2 years of defensive walls in a single second. "Can I stay tonight?" I didn't answer right away. In the quiet depths of my mind, 2 years of carefully cultivated self-preservation sounded a sharp warning. Claire was the woman who had walked away from our marriage when the weight of her career ambitions and my quiet contentment couldn't find common ground anymore. She was the woman who had packed her boxes into a moving truck while I sat silently on the front steps, unable to give her the fast-paced, high-society life she thought she needed. Yet, looking at her standing shivering in the freezing rain, clutching that battered suitcase like it was her last remaining anchor on earth, Every bitter instinct dissolved into raw concern. I stepped back from the threshold, swinging the heavy oak door wide open. "Get inside, Claire, before you catch pneumonia." She stepped across the threshold quietly, her bare wet shoes squeaking softly on the polished oak floorboards. I closed the heavy door, locking out the roaring wind, and the entryway fell into a thick, charged quietness. "Let me take your coat," I said, my voice low and measured. She nodded numbly, unbuttoning the damp trench coat with fingers that shook so violently she struggled with the top horn button. I stepped forward and unhitched it gently, careful not to let my hands brush her wet shoulders. I hung the heavy coat on the brass wall rack beside the door and took her suitcase, setting it near the hallway stairs. Claire looked around the living room, her hazel eyes absorbing every detail. The room hadn't changed much since she left. The same stone fireplace, the same deep leather armchair I had built during our second year of marriage, the same shelves lined with historical novels and architectural drafting books. But the small, delicate touches that had once made it her home, the dried lavender in glass vases, the colorful woven throw pillows, the framed art prints from our trip to coastal Maine, were gone, replaced by functional simplicity. "It looks quiet," she murmured softly, her arms wrapped tightly around her waist as she shivered in a damp gray sweater. "It is quiet," I replied. "Go sit by the fire. I'll get you a dry towel and make some tea." I walked into the bathroom, grabbed a plush navy cotton towel from the linen closet, and carried it back to the living room. Claire was sitting on the edge of the stone hearth, holding her hands out toward the crackling birch logs. Her shoulders were hunched, her posture carrying a weight that looked far too heavy for her frame. I handed her the towel. "Here." "Thank you, Ethan," she whispered, wrapping the cotton around her wet hair, rubbing gently. I walked into the kitchen, turned on the burner beneath the copper kettle, and took down 2 clay mugs from the open shelf. My hands were remarkably steady, but my mind was spinning in chaotic circles. Why was she here? Claire lived 200 miles away in Seattle. She was the senior director of public relations for a national real estate conglomerate. She drove a German luxury sedan, lived in a high-rise condominium overlooking the Puget Sound, and moved in circles that didn't include custom furniture builders in quiet timber towns. She had a family that adored her status and friends who measured success by quarterly earnings. Yet, she had driven 200 miles through a winter rainstorm to knock on my door at 11 o'clock at night with a single suitcase. When the kettle whistled, I poured the boiling water over chamomile tea bags, stirred in a spoonful of local clover honey, and carried the mugs back into the living room. I handed her a mug. Claire took it with both hands, allowing the heat of the ceramic to warm her frozen fingers. She took a slow sip, closing her eyes as the steam rose around her pale face. "Chamomile and clover honey," she said softly, a faint, sad smile flickering at the corner of her lips. "You remembered." "I remember most things, Claire," I said, leaning against the edge of the wooden coffee table, keeping a respectful 3 feet of distance between us. She stared down into the amber tea, her thumbs slowly tracing the rim of the mug. The silence between us wasn't hostile, but it was heavy with the unspoken weight of 24 months of separation. "I know I shouldn't have come here," Claire whispered, her voice cracking slightly. "I know I have no right to show up on your doorstep at midnight after everything." I took a sip of my tea, looking at her calmly through the warm firelight. "You're here now, Claire. Tell me what happened." Claire let out a long, shuddering breath, setting her tea mug down on the hearth stone beside her. She pulled the towel tighter around her shoulders, staring directly into the leaping flames. 3 days ago," she began, her voice carrying a flat, hollow resonance, "I resigned from Sterling Development." I raised an eyebrow slightly. Sterling Development was the firm she had spent 5 years sacrificing her health, her marriage, and her peace of mind to conquer. "Resigned? You were on track for managing partner by the end of the year." "I was," she said, letting out a bitter, joyless laugh. "Or rather, that's what they told me while they used me." She turned her head to look at me, her hazel eyes dark with a mixture of anger and profound betrayal. 6 weeks ago, during an internal audit for a new commercial housing project downtown, I discovered severe structural and financial irregularities. Claire explained, her words coming faster now, driven by the raw emotion of the memory. The senior partners had been falsifying building inspection reports and diverting public housing grant funds into private offshore holding accounts. They were building substandard residential units in low-income neighborhoods while pocketing millions. I set my mug down, my posture straightening. Did you report it? I brought the documents directly to Arthur Sterling, the founder, Claire said, her jaw tightening. I stupidly thought he was a man of integrity who simply didn't know what his junior partners were doing. I thought he would fix it. And what did he do? He smiled at me, Claire whispered, a tear finally escaping her eye and trailing down her cheek. He closed the folder, locked it in his desk drawer, and told me that if I wanted my partnership in December, I needed to learn the difference between corporate idealism and executive reality. He told me that if I took those files to the Municipal Oversight Board, he would make sure my career in the Pacific Northwest was utterly destroyed. I felt a cold rage ignited deep in my chest. Even though Claire and I were divorced, the thought of corrupt corporate executives cornering her made my hands clench into tight fists. What did you do, Claire? I asked quietly. I spent 3 weeks trying to convince myself to look the other way, she admitted, her voice dropping into a painful, honest whisper. I tried to be the ambitious, pragmatic woman my mother always told me I should be. But every time I looked in the mirror, I hated the person looking back at me. I realized that for 5 years, I had been running a race toward a finish line that didn't exist. She looked up at me, her hazel eyes shimmering with unshed tears in the amber firelight. Last night, I took the original compliance files, submitted them directly to the State Attorney General's Fraud Division, and walked out of my office forever, Claire revealed softly. By noon today, my former colleagues realized what I had done. My phone was flooded with threats. My mother called me screaming, telling me I had ruined my family's social standing and destroyed a brilliant career. She gestured toward her wet suitcase by the hallway door. I packed one bag, turned off my main phone, got into my car and just drove, she whispered. I drove for 4 hours through the rain, and when I couldn't see the road through my tears anymore, I realized there was only one place in the entire world where someone loved me for who I actually was, not for what I earned or what title I held. She looked straight into my eyes, her expression raw, unguarded, and completely vulnerable. I came here, Ethan, she wept softly, because you are the only real thing I have ever known. The rain continued to beat against the heavy glass windows, but inside the living room, the absolute silence was deafening. I sat on the coffee table, staring at my ex-wife. For 2 years, I had believed that Claire had left our marriage because I was too simple, too quiet, and too content with my humble woodworking life. I had believed she wanted gold lights, executive galas, and high society prestige. Now, sitting before me was a woman who had willingly burned her multi-million-dollar corporate career to the ground because she refused to compromise her core integrity. Claire, I said gently, leaning forward and resting my elbows on my knees. Why didn't you show me this side of you 3 years ago? Claire wiped her cheeks with the corner of the navy towel, letting out a shaky breath. Because 3 years ago, Ethan, I was terrified of being weak. She looked around the cozy, timber-framed living room, nostalgia softening her tired features. My whole life, my parents taught me that my value as a human being was tied directly to my accomplishments, Claire confessed quietly. When we got married, I loved the peace you gave me. I loved how grounded you were. But whenever I was around my colleagues or my family, I felt this overwhelming panic that if I slowed down, if I stopped striving for the next promotion, I would become invisible. She turned her eyes back to mine, filled with deep, sincere regret. I thought your quiet life was holding me back, she whispered. I was too blind to see that your quiet life was the only thing keeping me sane. By the time I realized how toxic my corporate world was, I had already pushed you away. I had already broken our home. I looked at her, at the wet dark hair, the exhausted hazel eyes, and the woman who had walked away from an empire to keep her soul clean. The resentment I had carried for 2 long years melted away in the warm firelight, replaced by a profound, mature clarity. We hadn't divorced because we stopped loving each other. We had divorced because we were living in 2 different worlds, speaking 2 different emotional languages, both too proud and terrified to admit how lost we were. "You didn't break everything, Claire?" I said softly, my voice calm and steady. She looked at me, startled. "What?" I stood up, walked over to the hallway coat rack, and pulled a soft, dry flannel shirt from my winter wardrobe. I walked back and handed it to her. "You're exhausted, Claire," I said gently. "You've been driving for hours and fighting a war for weeks. Take a hot shower. The guest room upstairs has fresh sheets on the bed." Claire looked at the soft flannel shirt in her hands, then up at my face. A fresh tear spilled over her eyelashes, but this time, it was a tear of profound relief. "Ethan," she murmured, her voice trembling. "Are you sure? I don't want to intrude on your life." "You're not intruding, Claire," I replied, offering her a faint, genuine smile. "This house was built on solid timber, can handle a storm." The next morning broke with crisp, crystal clear autumn sunlight streaming through the tall pine trees outside the kitchen window. The rainstorm had passed, leaving the garden smelling rich with damp earth, fallen leaves, and fresh cedar. I stood by the stove at 8 a.m., flipping blueberry pancakes on a heavy cast iron griddle, the smell of freshly brewed dark roast coffee filling the sunlit space. Soft footsteps sounded on the wooden stairs, and Claire walked into the kitchen. She wore my oversized red flannel shirt over dark denim jeans, her hair washed and dry, falling in soft waves around her shoulders. Though dark circles still lingered beneath her hazel eyes, her face looked relaxed, lighter, as if a mountain had been lifted off her ribs overnight. "Good morning," she said softly, leaning against the doorframe with a tentative smile. "Good morning," I smiled back, gesturing to the coffee pot. "Cups on the counter. Pancakes will be ready in 2 minutes." She poured herself a mug, taking a slow sip, and stepped over to the open window, looking out at the sunlit timber workshop in the backyard. "You built the new lumber storage shed," she noted, her eyes shining with genuine admiration. "It looks beautiful, Ethan." "Finished it in August," I replied, sliding 3 golden pancakes onto a warm plate and setting it at the kitchen table. "Sit down and eat before it gets cold." We sat across from each other at the oak dining table I had hand-carved during our first year of marriage. For 30 minutes, there were no corporate battles, no legal threats, and no painful memories. We ate simple pancakes, drank hot coffee, and talked about the local news, my upcoming furniture commissions, and how the autumn leaves were turning bright scarlet along the river. It was effortless, grounded, and intensely peaceful. A glimpse of what our life could have been if we had known how to protect it years ago. At 9:30 a.m., the quiet magic was interrupted by a sharp, loud buzzing. Claire's secondary phone, the one she had kept in her handbag, was vibrating violently against the granite countertop. The caller ID displayed, Celeste Vance, mother. Claire froze, her fork hovering mid-air, her face instantly turning pale. "Do you want to answer it?" I asked calmly. "If I don't, she'll keep calling until she drives down here," Claire sighed, her voice tight with returning anxiety. She tapped the screen and placed the phone on speaker, setting it between us on the wooden table. "Claire!" Her mother's sharp, demanding voice filled the kitchen. "Where are you? Arthur Sterling's legal team has been calling the family all morning. Do you have any idea the catastrophic mess you've created? You've ruined our family's reputation in Seattle." Claire took a deep, steadying breath. She looked across the table at me. I reached out across the oak wood, placing my large, calloused hand over her trembling fingers. Claire looked at my hand, then at the phone. The fear in her eyes vanished, replaced by an absolute, quiet certainty. "Mother, listen to me very carefully," Claire said, her voice dropping into a clear, unwavering cadence that rang with newfound strength. "I did not ruin anything. Arthur Sterling and his partners committed grand financial fraud and put innocent families in unsafe housing. I did my duty as a human being. You threw away a $300,000 salary for ethics? Celeste shrieked over the speaker. You are acting like a child. Where are you right now? I am at Ethan's house, Claire replied calmly. A heavy, shocked silence hung over the line for 3 full seconds. Ethan's? Her mother scoffed with bitter contempt. The woodworker. Claire, you walked away from that dead-end, simple life 2 years ago. Why are you running back to a man who has zero ambition? I didn't say a word. I simply held Claire's hand tight, offering her my silent strength. Claire stood up from the table, holding the phone close to her face, her hazel eyes blazing with pure, unadulterated clarity. Ethan isn't lacking ambition, Mother, Claire declared firmly. He has the ambition to build a life of truth, beauty, and integrity. He builds things that last, while your friends build golden cages made of lies. She took a deep breath. Do not call me again until you are ready to apologize for how you treated my life and my choices. Goodbye, Mother. Claire tapped the red button, ending the call, and placed the phone face down on the table. The kitchen fell into a profound, golden stillness. Claire stood near the sunlit window, her chest heaving slightly, looking down at the silent phone. She had just cut the final cord binding her to the toxic expectations that had ruled her entire adult life. She turned around slowly to look at me. I stood up from the oak table, walked across the floorboards, and stopped 2 feet in front of her. I didn't say anything. I simply reached out and gently brushed a stray lock of dark hair behind her ear, my rough thumb tracing the soft contour of her cheek. That was very brave, Claire, I said softly. Claire looked up into my gray eyes, her lower lip trembling as fresh, warm tears welled in her hazel eyes. Not tears of fear or grief, but tears of pure, liberated joy. It wasn't bravery, Ethan, she whispered, leaning her face comfortably into the palm of my hand. It was just me finally choosing what actually matters. She looked around the quiet kitchen, then back into my eyes. When I left 2 years ago, Claire confessed, her voice thick with emotion, I thought I was running toward my future, but these past 2 days, I realized I was just running away from the only place where I was ever truly happy. She took a slow, trembling breath. I don't have a high-paying corporate job anymore, Ethan. I don't have a luxury apartment or a high society status. I'm just Claire, a woman who wants to build something honest with her own hands. She looked at me with an agonizing, beautiful vulnerability. Is there still room in your quiet life for someone like me? I didn't answer with words. Instead, I stepped closer, wrapping my heavy arms around her waist, pulling her flush against my chest. Claire let out a soft, choked gasp, throwing her arms around my neck, burying her face into the crook of my shoulder as if she had finally found dry land after years at sea. I held her tight, feeling the steady, rhythmic beat of her heart against mine. There was always room for you, Claire, I whispered into her hair, my voice thick with a quiet, powerful conviction. I built this whole house waiting for you to come home. Outside the window, the autumn sun shone brightly over the Oregon hills, painting the river pasture in brilliant shades of gold, crimson, and deep emerald. The storm had cleared, the noise of the world had faded into nothingness, and inside the quiet timber home, 2 brave souls who had lost their way in the dark finally closed the door on the past, and began building a life that would last forever. True success is never measured by the height of an executive title, the luxury of a city apartment, or the applause of superficial crowds. It is forged through the quiet integrity of staying true to your values and having the courage to protect the people and places you love. Claire spent years trapped in a golden cage of ambition, but Ethan showed her that the bravest step a person can take is stepping off the corporate ladder and returning to authentic love. Thank you so much for joining us for this deeply moving story today. If Ethan and Claire's journey of second chances touched your heart, please like this video, subscribe to our channel, and turn on the notification bell so you never miss an uplifting story. We would love to hear your thoughts in the comments below. Have you ever had to walk away from a toxic environment or an old expectation to find true peace of mind. Take care of yourselves, stay true to your heart, and we will see you in the next story.